Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks got off to a great start against the Georgia Bulldogs, but that great start completely fluttered away in the second half as South Carolina just ran out of gas against the Georgia Bulldogs late. Let's talk about all that on this reaction edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome to this special live reaction edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. As always, I am Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast. I thank y'all so much for tuning in. As always, be sure that you are checking us out on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, where you can find shows that are posted Monday through Friday every single week. But with all that being said, let's get into this game that just took place between South Carolina and the Georgia Bulldogs. Gamecock fans, I know it doesn't feel good saying this, and it never feels good saying something like this, but I think that you've got to come away with this loss actually feeling pretty good about this football team. Yes, this team had their chances, and yes, this team had a stranglehold over this game at halftime. They did. But unfortunately, competitive depth showed up, the lack of competitive depth compared to Georgia, and certain trends that have been going in the wrong direction for South Carolina so far this season showed up in the second half. So let's start off with the offensive side of the ball. I'm really proud of this offensive line unit. I thought that this unit, for the most part, did a really good job against a Georgia defense that people jokingly said was going to basically annihilate them today. Pat McAfee made a joke on ESPN that this offense might give up 20 to 25 sacks against Georgia's defense. And sure, Georgia got their share of sacks in the second half, but they did not torch them for the whole 60 minutes like some national pundits thought they would. I thought that Dow Loggins did a good job on the very first drive of this game, calling a bunch of quick passes to the perimeter, getting the ball out to playmakers in open space, letting them be the reason that South Carolina drove down the field. The screen call to Juice Wells was a really good call as well. And South Carolina, they delivered the first punch to the Georgia Bulldogs. And I think that from that moment on, Georgia's entire fan base, all the fans that were in that stadium, were kind of taken aback. I think that it really sent the message to them early that, hey, we're going to come out fighting. We're not going to just sit here and roll over for you just because you've won back-to-back national championships. And I really think it gave South Carolina a great burst of momentum and confidence to start this game. Like, hey, we can go toe-to-toe with these guys. And then for the rest of the first half, again, this offense, they only scored one more touchdown, actually for the entire rest of the football game. But the thing I liked in the first half was that there weren't too many negative plays. The one critique I would have of Dow Loggins' first half play calling, I did feel like at times South Carolina did not even try to go to the run game in order to keep this Georgia defensive front honest. I think that there was one drive where South Carolina, they called two swing passes basically, or two quick little screens out to the edge, 2 plays in a row, and it got blown up for a loss of yardage on both occasions. And it led to a 3rd and long. South Carolina, I believe, went 3 and out on that drive. But the final drive, the first half, it was a pretty good one. Spencer Rattler connected with Xavier Legette deep down the field. You saw that a good amount in the first half, using some comeback routes, using some crossing routes. And the thing I also liked about Dow Loggins and his first half play calling was the fact that he kept some of these guys back to help out the offensive line. Trey Knox was used a ton as a chip blocker at the tight end position today, helping to give those offensive tackles a little bit of extra assistance against those Georgia edge rushers. He kept Carolina Joyner back in the pocket several times against any linebackers that could scream up the middle. And I thought that the offensive line, again, even though they did get some help from some of these other skill players, I thought they did a pretty solid job. In the second half, obviously, that did not continue. At halftime, the first thought that I had when it came to this offense was Georgia's going to ratchet up the pressure. They're not going to play this, 4 or 5 man, pressure package or pressure philosophy, if you want to call it that, to where they try to flush Spencer Rattler out of the pocket and force him to make plays on the run. The thing is, with Georgia's talents going against most quarterbacks, that's usually going to work for them. So you can understand from their side of things why they started out that way defensively. But I think Kirby Smart and that Georgia coaching staff at halftime, the first thing that they said was, we're going to have to dial up the pressure because we can't give number 7 all the time in the world to make the throws he did in the first half. Because Spencer Rattler, sure, he had times where he had to make some guys miss. He did get flushed out of the pocket. He had to step up in the pocket, had to take off running. But Spencer Rattler, as he has done all season so far, continued to play with poise, didn't make too many bad mistakes. He had one ball that he fluttered up to Luke Doty off a play action play that just got completely blown up. Had a free rusher, I think, come right at him, and he made a throw off his back foot, which you're never supposed to do as a quarterback. Besides that one decision, I did not see a whole lot of negatives with Spencer Rattler's play today. But again, that second half, Georgia bringing 6-man blitzes. Sometimes I think they even brought a 7th man in there. That really got to this offensive line. And the other thing was Georgia ran a bunch of stunts and twists to go along with those blitzes that they were throwing out there. So it wasn't like these guys were just lining up over one gap and just bomb rushing right in there. Georgia was sending one guy one direction. They were having the edge rusher come in at the guard and center. And I have to admit, there were some pretty bad breakdowns at times in terms of these guys either reacting quickly enough in terms of communication or just flat out getting to the spot they needed to in order to take on that twist or stunt rusher. And that caused Spencer Rattler to be a lot more uncomfortable in the pocket. He had to flush out a lot more laterally, which admittedly is probably a little bit better for Georgia, at least in terms of their side of things. And South Carolina's offense basically slowed down to a crawl at that point because there obviously isn't very much of a ground game to begin with. And the Gamecocks made pretty clear in the first half that they were not going to go to the ground game very often. I was kind of disappointed that when the game was still close that they kind of left it alone. Because again, I'm a firm believer in you got to keep the defense honest in terms of running the ball up the middle, even if it means at times you're going to get only 1 or 2 yards. I thought that Mario Anderson, I definitely saw that he got some extra playing time today. So he got some playing time early in this game. I think it was an important part of that first drive, getting the Gamecocks kind of close to a first down in the red zone to where when they did have some trouble, it wasn't like it was 3rd and 20 plus. I still feel like that Mario Anderson needs to play a little bit more, but I'll save that thought for the Sunday or Monday show that I do right here on Locked On Gamecocks. All in all, Spencer Rattler continued to be Spencer Rattler, but unfortunately, when you don't get enough time to settle in the pocket and throw the football on a rope and find your receivers, you're just not going to be very successful over the course of an entire football game against a team that's got as much talent as Georgia has. I saw some people that were tweeting that were at the game that some of these receivers were wide open on some of these plays and, following it up with the caveat of if Spencer Rattler just had a little bit more time, if he had another second or two to just plant his feet and unleash that football, then he would have had a play. But coulda, shoulda, woulda is what ends up being talked about when you lose a game like this. But offensively, I saw some encouraging signs, and I also saw some things that this offense still definitely needs to work on. There was a couple guys at the skill position that did not step up enough today. Unfortunately, Juice Wells was basically in there for one drive, the first drive of the game, which ironically enough, he scored the touchdown to start this game, and he came out right after that. And Shane Beamer, when talking to Jenny Dell of CBS Sports, he finally let on that he has a broken bone in his foot, that he's got a pin in his foot right now. And so that is seemingly what's been holding him back for the last month and a half or so. And obviously, as a wide receiver, when you have a broken bone in your foot, that is definitely not ideal. So offensively, I thought that the start to the game was good, but unfortunately was a game plan that over time just got completely swarmed by Georgia's talent advantage that they had and their athleticism advantage. I'll talk about some more individual players later on, but I do want to talk about the defensive side of the ball because it's kind of the same deal. Defense had a decent first half, but things just happened to fall apart in the second half. I'm going to touch on what all took place with that side of the ball in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. This live reaction show, the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, you always want to have really good employees that are under you that can fulfill their roles and help your small business thrive. Whether you are a gym owner, maybe you own a consultation firm, or maybe you run a landscaping company, does not matter. You've got to have the right people that work in your company. So if you're looking for the qualified candidates to fill in those roles, you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. Just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring, and utilize tools like screening questions to filter through the candidates. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Be sure to post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions do apply. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the defensive side of the ball now. This defense, I have to admit, the scoreboard says one thing in terms of how they played in the first half. And don't get me wrong, the defense put up a solid fight in the first half. I thought TJ Sanders played out of his mind. That man was playing against those Bulldog offensive linemen like his hair was on fire. He was fantastic in this first half. The problem that eventually started to show as this game continued to progress is that, y'all, I'm going to be honest, South Carolina they just don't have a game record up front. They just don't. I'm not sure what exactly is going on with Tonka Hemingway, but he has not exactly had a great start to this season. He was a guy that was expected to be sort of a leader up front, and I get it. When you're facing a team like Georgia, who have the biggest and in certain cases the most athletic offensive lineman you're going to face all season long, it's going to be difficult to win those one-on-one battles, especially difficult when you have to face double teams on certain occasions. But this Gamecock defensive front just continues to lack in terms of disruption, in terms of havoc plays being created. In the first half, they made enough plays happen to where they were able to get off the field, even if they allowed Georgia to run 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 plays on a certain drive. But in the second half, that sort of bend but don't break play style that seemed to be playing out in this football game, it caught up to them because they played so much in the first half that they were kind of already a bit tired going into the second half. The offense gets off to a horrific start in that final 30-minute stretch. And defensively, they just got gashed. And they got gashed on the edges specifically. The power run game for Georgia, they started to lean on that a lot more in the second half. And if you notice, they were going to the edge. They were doing some tosses to the halfback. They were running some off-tackle runs from one side of the formation to the other side. And South Carolina constantly was getting beat. If you're going to be running a 4-2-5 defense like Clayton White and this staff does, you've got to find a way to make plays happen on those off-tackle runs. And South Carolina just did not do that. And as they continued to get more and more tired, you saw Georgia break more tackles. You saw more arm tackle attempts from these Gamecock defenders. And you saw Georgia getting 4 yards of pop, 6 yards of pop, 8 yards of pop. And when the Georgia Bulldogs get on that kind of roll offensively, that is when you're in trouble as a defense. And South Carolina just could not buy a stop in that second half. I give credit to Debo Williams and Stone Bland for continuing to be active. It seemed like that those guys basically played the entire football game, even though they can't be doing that every single week. And Clayton White has acknowledged that in his press conferences. But I just think that what happened was the guys just got worn out. They were just flat worn out. It just felt like a repeat of the Notre Dame game in the Gator Bowl back in December all over again, where it's like Georgia was not getting the kill shot. They weren't putting the final nail in the coffin. But South Carolina's defense, just by a little bit on multiple occasions, they just could not get the stop when they needed to. The other thing that about drove me crazy during this football game was the amount of like 3rd and 5s, 3rd and 6s, 3rd and 7s that Georgia did get into at times in the second half. And South Carolina in the secondary decided to run soft zone coverage. Now, I would understand to a certain extent not running man because it's Georgia that's got to get 7 yards. But at the same time, Georgia recognized that, and they continued to attack the perimeter. And on a couple of occasions, Carson Beck did what Furman's quarterback did all night last weekend and just threw a bunch of slant routes, got easy completions for 5, 6, 7 yards, and continued to move the sticks. And I tweeted this during the game. At some point, Clayton White, you got to be a bit aggressive. You got to take chances. You got to quit playing this bend but don't break style of coverage. And I get it. The secondary's banged up. The secondary is younger. But you're playing the number 1 ranked team in the entire country today. You're in this ball game. You're not down by that much. Take some shots, or else this defense will stay out on the field for the entire second half. And that's what ended up happening. Now, obviously, that's not the only reason why this defense slowly got worn down, but it definitely was something from a coaching standpoint that I was kind of flabbergasted about, to be honest with y'all. So defensively, again, I give those guys credit because they fought their tails off. But against the Georgia Bulldogs, when you can't get off the field, that is when they got you right where they want you. And that's how South Carolina wound up giving up 21 second half points and wound up losing this football game. We're going to continue this conversation on South Carolina's SEC opening loss to the Georgia Bulldogs. What exactly should our main takeaways be from this football game? Where do the Gamecocks go from here? We're going to dive into all of that in just a couple of moments. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. Now, the NFL season is also here. There's going to be a plethora of games that are going to be taking place on Sunday afternoon. And one of those games is going to involve the San Francisco 49ers, who have been getting off to a hot start this season. They blew out the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 1. Deebo Samuel, obviously a big-time playmaker for that offense. And there's a lot of people that believe they could be one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl. FanDuel has currently set the 49ers Super Bowl odds at plus 750. If you think the 49ers could go all the way this season, now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel is the official betting partner of the NFL. All right, let's wrap up this reaction show to South Carolina's Week 3 loss against the Georgia Bulldogs. What should our main takeaways be? Well, let's start off with Spencer Rattler once again, because South Carolina, if there's one thing that they can fall back on, there's one thing that's going to make this coaching staff sleep well at night, it's the fact that they got number 7 at quarterback. I know Spencer Rattler ended the game with 2 interceptions. Quite frankly, both of them, I think, were just sort of YOLO throws, if I had to call it that. Rattler at that point, knowing that this game was getting out of reach, the offense needed a big play. And when Rattler does get to that kind of point, he is willing to just throw the ball up and sort of see what happens. It's a bad habit of his. It's something that he's still going to have to work on as he goes on to the NFL eventually after this season. But once again, South Carolina has proven they're going to be in every ball game they play this year because number 7 is their quarterback. And the funny thing is, I brought up the fact that I thought Lenore Sellers should get some snaps in this game. I thought that he should get maybe some Wildcat snaps where he could be a running threat. And I still do kind of believe that. But I know a lot of you also said, don't take Spencer Rattler out of this football game. Let him go out there and just roll the dice with your guy. And y'all were right. You were beyond right. Because Spencer Rattler, again, despite all the odds and circumstances, he continues to impress in these football games. This is still a different Spencer Rattler. And if he can make the kind of throws he made today against Georgia and fight the way he did, there's no defense out there, I think, that can conquer that kid. Spencer Rattler, and I say kid, he's not a kid. He's a grown man now, on and off the football field. And he is showing that in multiple different ways this season. This offensive line, here's what I will say. Tree Babalade got the start today, left tackle. Tree Babalade, if you're listening on podcast, I'm giving a round of applause right now to him. That is not easy, what Tree Babalade did today. He got his first college start against the number 1 team in the country, a team that's got, as Shane Beamer put it 2 years ago, hundreds of 5-stars on their roster. You were playing in Athens, in the Bulldogs' backyard. And Tree Babalade went out there, and you know what's funny? Besides 1 or 2 false starts that I can recall, I can't recall any other play where I looked at Tree Babalade and said he did not do a good job. He played really, really solid. Quite frankly, he played better than some of the veterans that have been listed in front of him for the last couple weeks. The left side of the line of scrimmage, I thought looked pretty solid. Vershawn Lee, Nick Gargiulo, and Ja'Kai Moore on the interior, I thought that those guys did well overall. Again, got to be a bit quicker on picking up stunts and twists, a couple blown assignments there in terms of, kind of passing off one guy and collecting the other. But again, I'll still say that I thought those guys did pretty well. Right side of the line has got to be better. They're going to have to find an answer at right tackle. They've tried multiple guys there now, and I think, quite frankly, they still need to keep doing some trial and error in practice, because I think you've got your left tackle now, Tree Babalade. Again, if he can go out there and play well against Georgia, stick with the kid. Stick with the freshman. He's going to make mistakes. Fine. You'll live with it. But he's going to be better for it as time progresses. Right tackle, I think that needs to be a battle that continues beyond this week. Still not getting enough out of that spot. Defensively speaking, again, considering some of the guys that were banged up, Nick Emery was banged up. It was good to see that he played along with David Spalding. And from what I could tell on watching the game from home, neither of those guys were sort of dinged up or hobbling around as the game was going on. So that was a good sign. Credit the athletic training staff for that. This defensive front has still got to find a way to make more plays happen. TJ Sanders was great on Saturday. Here's the problem. He cannot be the only defensive lineman that you throw out there as a guy that played really well. Some of these other guys have just got to find a way to make some things happen. You got Trayvon Robertson there coaching up the D tackles. You got edge defenders that have good athleticism, have good speed, have some experience. But this defense, the way it's playing right now, there's too much pressure being put on these linebackers. Stone Bland and Debo Williams, if those guys aren't making the plays up front, it's guaranteed positive yardage for the opposing offense. That is not good. I've said that the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to continue to say it for the rest of this season. And it gives me the idea that this defense, they're probably going to make some improvements statistically this year, but I don't know how big that improvement's going to be. I just don't know. Obviously, you can bank on the fact that this defense will get better, but the point is, we're 3 years in now with this staff. There's got to be some immediate improvement from the start of the season. We can't keep playing this game of, well, by week 6, 7, or 8, we're going to be better. That's going to be the way for most football teams. You're not the only team in the country that's going to get better as the season continues to progress. So y'all got to figure some things out. I liked the pressure that Clayton White did dial up in the first half. I thought that the Gamecocks got home on a lot of those plays. I thought that they rattled Carson Beck. It caused him to be a bit more hesitant with the football. I did like that. But again, it's just kind of frustrating to watch when this defense, they're tired, they're gassed, but you've got to have a game wrecker. Help is on the way. And you've got younger players that are going to get better. Desmond Zulu at the edge spot. Xavier McLeod on the interior. Dylan Stewart, as long as nothing happens the rest of this recruiting cycle, he's coming. He might have a chance to start from day one. 5-star defensive tackle Elijah Griffin was in attendance for this game, by the way. He was in Columbia this past week, gave some really good reviews about that football game and the atmosphere that you fans, by the way, created for that contest. And he was there in attendance for the Georgia-South Carolina game today. And you know something? I think the main takeaway he's going to have is that defense showed a lot of fight. This team was in the football game. Quite frankly, I'm going to go on a limb right now for this live reaction show. If I had to name a leader right now, I'd say the Gamecocks are ahead of Georgia in Elijah Griffin's recruitment by a couple of hairs. Now, Georgia obviously is not going to give up on that recruitment without a fight. He's a Georgia native, just barely being in the city of Savannah. But Elijah Griffin seeing that kind of performance today, again, it did not end the way you want it to. But I think you can walk away and you could tell not just him, but Amari Adams, who was in attendance for this game, 4-star defensive tackle from South Carolina. You could tell all these recruits, listen, we're not the South Carolina from 2 years ago. We were competitive against the back-to-back national champions playing in their backyard. And if we just make a couple plays here and there, this game is coming down to the wire at the end of this matchup. And you could be the ones that help to put us over the top. Now, obviously, you can't live on that recruiting pitch for forever, but it's okay to use right now because, again, clearly you got a lot of youth on this roster. You got some younger guys that you're having to rely on immediately in this moment. So for Shane Beamer and this staff to have their team go out there, not get blown off the line of scrimmage at the start of this game, deliver the first couple knockout blows in the first half. Think about this, y'all. Last year in Columbia, when South Carolina played Georgia, the score at the end of the first quarter was 21-0 Bulldogs. The game was basically over 15 minutes in. Today, South Carolina went into the fourth quarter still in this football game. They ought to be doggone proud of that. I wish I could say some other words, but I can't because we try to be clean on this podcast. We try to be family friendly on this podcast. Point being, sure, the scoreboard, it's not what you want at the end of the day. You don't want to say, well, this is a moral victory. You don't want to lean on that. But I think if you're a South Carolina fan, you got to feel good. You got to feel good because what that showed is that the gap is not as significant as people made it out to be. Again, the spread coming into this game was 27.5 points. 27.5 points, 4 touchdowns. Odds makers didn't think you stood a chance in this game. National pundits didn't think you stood a chance in this game. I admittedly sat here and said that I just did not feel like that South Carolina was going to be able to keep up. I think the final score prediction I gave was 38-21. Wasn't too terribly far off in terms of the score differential, but you should be proud of this team today. You should, even in a loss. So now what has to happen is Shane Beamer and this staff, they got to bring all their guys in together and they got to support them, build them up. And I would, again, hammer on the positives from this game because you got a ton of positives to take away. But also remind them, listen, one play right here cost us this drive. A penalty right here really changed the momentum, helped out Georgia. You've got to nitpick. You nitpick on Sunday in the film sessions that you do with each individual position unit, and you let these guys know you're not that far off, okay? Everybody else outside this building is going to tell you you're still 2-3 years away, people including myself. But you're not that far off. Why can't we make noise right now? We have guys in this building that can help us win football games like this. This isn't the old South Carolina that's going to get blown out anymore. It's not the same South Carolina. It's not the same old Gamecocks. It's a new era here. And sure, we lost today. But next year, 2 years from now, against Georgia at least, why not us? Why can't we win? A lot to be proud of. That's the main takeaway that you should have coming out of this game. With that being said, that's going to do it for this live reaction show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Thank you so much to those of you that tuned in today. What are your thoughts on this game? What are your main takeaways going forward for both sides of the ball? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. If you watched this show on YouTube or if you listen to this on an audio podcast app, shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @ALion_SC. I plan to definitely do a show tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to just post one in the morning after I watch the film or if I'm going to save it for Monday. I'll let y'all know once I make that final call. But either way, have a great rest of your night, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.